My name is Paul Fahy. I'm the Artistic Director of Galway International Arts Festival. Thank you very much for coming along here. I'm delighted to welcome you all here to the annual Seamus Deane lecture with our keynote address this evening by Dr Bryan McMahon on the right to have rights direct provision. I'm also delighted to welcome our other participants this evening, the actor Stephen Rea, poets Jessica Traynor and Christian O'Barrow, local activist Blessings Moya, delighted to say a good pal of mine, and the musician Paddy Glacken. We're very grateful to our hosts this evening, the National University of Ireland, Galway, and in particular President Jim Brown and Professor Patrick Lonergan, both of whom are here this evening. So thank you both very, very much. As part of our ongoing... Thank you. As part of our ongoing First Thought Talks series, Galway International Arts Festival is delighted to have had this opportunity to work with Field Day on this lecture. And I'm really pleased to welcome our great friend, one of the co-founders of Field Day, the wonderful actor Stephen Rea, to the stage to introduce the evening. Thank you very much and welcome, Stephen.
Good evening. Before saying anything, I have to thank Paul Fahy, Mr. GIAF, for all the work that he's done to make this thing happen. And I also need to thank Jim Brown and Patrick Lonergan for allowing this to happen. This is the third Seamus Deane lecture. We established this annual lecture series to honour Seamus Deane by continuing his legacy of provoking discussion about Ireland and its political future. Seamus has an international reputation, as we know, in the world of literature and literary criticism. As he himself has stated, his work is not devoted to a rewriting of the Irish past, but to a writing of the Irish present. Unfortunately, Seamus is unwell, otherwise he would address us, but he has sent us some words that I'm going to say now. Hannah Arendt's famous phrase, "the right to have rights," was coined in her 1958 book, The Human Condition. It was part of her long argument, which began in 1943 with her essay, We Refugees, about Jewish migrants who had become stateless, that condition in which they had no rights, that asked why European civilization had so successfully, within its system of states, concealed the barbarism that made statelessness pandemic and human rights so unavailable to the millions of displaced persons of World War II. She and many since, particularly the philosopher Giorgio Agamben, have described how the paradigm of the cosmopolitan, the person who belonged to the global community and who was always of European provenance, has been displaced by the refugee, who is now most definitely a non-European figure. And now it has become clear that the concentration camp of the 20th century was not some historical anomaly, but that it is still the paradigm place of Western consciousness. The internment camp is a zone of suspension, of rendition, a place that is always outside the country it is inside. Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and those entrapped there expose the hollowness of any claim to universal human rights, to having rights just on the basis of being human. Arendt said it plainly. The refugee, the displaced, has regularly been denied the right to have rights. All rhetoric aside, that is a political decision. What Field Day is aiming to do with this pair of lectures to talk about rights is to talk about rights here for the human beings who live here and now all over this country. An initial basic step in this conversation is to point out that each of us has the right to have rights. Everything else flows from there. Now, to continue the evening, I'd like to call on Jessica Traynor, the poet, and Paddy Glacken, the musician. Jessica's going to read some poetry, and then Paddy is going to play. Okay?
Thank thank you so much for that, Stephen, and thank you so much to Field Day for this marvellous invitation to be here and to read some poems in response to this incredibly important subject matter. I'm going to read from a series of poems that were commissioned in 2016 by the Salvage Press, and I was asked by Jamie Murphy, who runs the Salvage Press, to respond to Swift's work, A Modest Proposal, to celebrate the 350th anniversary of Swift's birth. So Jamie and I had a chat and we thought, well, how best to respond to the kind of marvellously grotesque work that is A Modest Proposal from a 21st century perspective. And that was the provocation that Jamie gave me, to try and respond again from a kind of a contemporary point of view, to hold up a poetic mirror to the current state of the nation. And in A Modest Proposal, Swift speaks about the present deplorable state of the nation as if it were a given. So I thought that might give me some license to do the same with my poetry. I'm going to start off with a poem that responds to the current housing and homelessness crisis. And I think we're all very aware in the wake of the budget about how language, when it's politicised, can become incredibly clinical and can distance us from the actual experience of people, from the real lived and human experience of people in hotel rooms all over the country or sleeping on the streets. And I was also thinking when I wrote this poem about the language of algorithms, how the current makeup of the internet can, I suppose, heighten both the genius of humanity but also its folly. So this poem is called A Proposed Housing Algorithm. For our purposes, let us think of the country as a small white box, and within it, millions of smaller boxes, each with a dot of red like the blood spot in an egg. These are the building blocks of life. Here, in my world, they are clean, defined. It is my job to fill some boxes and empty others. In many, the dots have faded. These are the elderly whose needs are few, who use less space. We group them into nuclei, along with those less solvent, for comfort, community, warmth. Who will be alone now? They have given me a bright room to work in, and my equation has almost come out. Walls bare as an architect's model, within them ruby beads of life. I've almost puzzled it out, but must admit that if the box were to be opened, flattened into some new pattern, some beads would be lost, and others would have no resting place at all. The system would fracture into another unsolved equation, all symmetry lost in chaos, but beautiful still in the way of imperfect things. This next poem I'm going to read responds directly to direct provision and especially to the marvellous website Asylum Archive, which is a fantastic living record of the reality of direct provision and has some amazing images that are very striking, and I would recommend that if you haven't come across it yet, you do look at it. This particular poem makes reference to a photo that I found of a cardboard clock that looked like it had been made by a child. A very kind of simple cardboard cutout with the numerals on the face that start off Roman and then kind of spiral into lots of strange letters and symbols that seem to go on forever. And to me, this felt like a very powerful representation of the time that is stolen from people in direct provision. And this is called The Camp. People once came here on holidays. Can you imagine? The Earth's navel on view outside the window, grass pocked with mud, and nothing for miles but bad weather. When asylum seekers came, someone wired the walls with 100 flat black eyes. How bored they must have been, these cameras, watching the slow waltz of imprisonment, the petty squabbles, the shudder of a waking body on a cold morning, the horizon lifting like a cat's third eyelid above the frozen ground, the glare of a bare light bulb casting tableau behind families hunched over scheduled dinners as tablets rattle in medication vials and children squall until a door is slammed. Who was the monster at the centre of this maze? Nothing left now but a cardboard clock, an abandoned lesson, its numbers unravelling, spooling outwards all the way from 1 to 33 until it loses hope. And I'm going to finish now with a short poem that references our current outdated abortion laws. Tender butchery. As my feet cramp in the stirrups, I consider skin, its layers and mysteries. I consider my own sensation splitting within me and whether I can feel that tear. I think about mementos, about what we can carry home and what we can't. The finest gloves ever made were stitched from chicken skin, so thin they would fold into a walnut shell, so gauzy that the wearer could feel an eyelash light upon them. I am that delicate now, a membrane stretched to encompass all the world. If I could take this moment, I would fold it like those gloves, lock it in a walnut shell, crush it or swallow it whole. The world has no business wearing my skin. Thank you.
Well, just so those I may just provide him Mawayas the Colonel, Stephen August Neil Martin, Hugo Kudu, the Portux Samoka Show and Show in Olive. I'm going to play a tune which was recently written by Neil Martin here, and it's a tune that is inspired by the great piper Liam O'Flynn, and it's based on basically I think the inspiration for it was on a story that Liam told Neil, and it conjured up a very strong image, obviously, of a young boy sitting in the sidecar of a motorbike, driving through a place called Glannagnalt in County Kerry, the valley of the demented. And seemingly it was a place where people who had mental illness would be sent to this particular part for a year, and they would be cured of all these things. So Neil called it The Boy in the Glen, so we'll try and give it a go. Thank you very much, and thank you, Neil. I'm going to just finish up with a tune which I think will be just in keeping with the theme of the evening. It's a tune which comes from the Napoleonic era, when we all look to Napoleon as our great saviour, and there's a great body of traditional music which has been written around Napoleon, many songs, many, many tunes, and this is just one of them from the era called The Rights of Man. So. Thank you.
Thanks, Paddy, and thanks, Neil, and thanks, Jessica. So now we're going to the main address of the evening, which is going to be delivered by Dr Bryan McMahon. After taking law degrees at University College Dublin and at Harvard Law School, where he was one of the first Irish students to attend, Dr McMahon joined the Department of Law in University College Cork, where he became professor and head of the department. He subsequently held a part-time chair of law at this university while practicing as a senior partner with the Houlihan and McMahon law firm. A founding member of the Irish Association of Law Teachers, he has authored several legal textbooks and also been chair of the governing body of UCC. Having become a judge of the Circuit Court in 1999, he was promoted to the High Court in 2007. In 2012, he was made an honorary Doctor of Laws by UCD. Since retiring from the bench in 2011, Dr McMahon has extended his record of civic engagement, which includes service as chair of the Irish University's Quality Board, of the National Archives Advisory Council, and of the Abbey Theatre, as well as leading advisory groups on crime and the constitutional referendum on judges' pay. Most recently, he led a government-appointed working group to produce the McMahon Report 2015 on improvements to the protection process, including direct provision and supports to asylum seekers. Since that report was submitted, Dr McMahon has remained actively involved in the public discussion of progress and shortfalls in the state's response to that report's recommendations. So, will you give a big welcome, please, to Dr Bryan McMahon.
Dus akbar bhfuil cócháirteach sa dhéanamh le muinte na Galibh agus lucht imánaíochta na Galibh go háirithe as ucht an gasca mór I dhéanaidir an míse chaite I barc an chrócaigh. to win the All-Ireland for the first time in 29 years, and not only that, to win the Leinster title and the league, and for the minors to win the All-Ireland title in the same year, you must be bursting. It's an extraordinary achievement after such a long wait. I was at Croke Park 29 years ago in the company of one of the great Galway hurlers who never won an All-Ireland, Joe Salmon. And on that occasion, he did a jig. And since then, he has moved on, but I have no doubt he did several jigs last month in honor of the occasion. When I was approached by Stephen Rea to give this lecture, Stephen, in his low-key, subtle way, might have been accused of selling me a pup, in the sense that he said, you'll say a couple of words at a thing we're having in Galway. Very low-key stuff. You won't have to do much preparation. It is all right. And, of course, I suddenly woke up that I was going to be Field Day's annual Seamus Deane lecturer for the night. And, of course, Ray was not to be seen. It reminds me of the story of Aubrey Waugh, one of the famous literary family in England, who was a well-known lecturer, journalist, writer. And he was asleep in his apartment in Park Lane. And in the middle of the night, he got a phone call. And he struggled in the dark, and he pulled his eye mask off. And he grabbed the phone, and clearly, from the voice at the other end, it was an African voice. And it said, "You will lecture to our students." And he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and sat up. "You will lecture to our students in Lagos University." And he sat up further, and "What do you want me to speak on?" And he said, "I would like you to speak on press freedom in Africa." So he made a note of this and went back to sleep. But 3 days later, an envelope came with a first-class ticket for 2 weeks' time to Lagos. So this was serious business. First class, he wasn't used to flying first class. So he decided that he'd better get himself in shape. So he spent the next 2 weeks writing his lecture. And he spent a lot of time and detail with it. And the time came for him to depart. He went to Heathrow and he checked his bag 4 times to see that he didn't leave his lecture. He didn't worry about his passport, but had he his lecture? He got on board, and he wasn't used, as I say, to first-class travel, and he overindulged a little bit in the bubbly, but it didn't matter because there was a day between his landing and the lecture. But when he was some hours out, the air hostess came to him and said, "There's been a little error in the timing. You won't have time to go to your hotel. The car will be on the Tarmacadam, and you've got to go straight to the university because they're all gathered there when you come." So he rushed and panicked to the washroom, spruced himself up as best he could, felt his lecture bag again, and sure enough, he got great consolation from that. When the plane landed, he was first off, and there was a limousine on the Tarmacadam, and a gentleman magnificently dressed in African garb approached him, introduced himself as the president, and ushered him into the limousine, and they drove. In 20 minutes, they were in the university, and this magnificent theatre, 500 people all gathered, and a hush fell when he came in. He sat down, the president began to introduce him, and while he was getting his lecture out of his bag, he looked at the blackboard behind him, and there written on the blackboard was the subject of the lecture: breastfeeding in Africa. And someone said, "What did you do?" Well, he said, I took my lecture out of my bag, I put it on the podium, and I read it word for word as I had written it, except for the word press freedom. I substituted breastfeeding every time it came. Try it sometime. The moral of the story, of course, is when you're invited to give a lecture, get it in writing. So you know what you're in for. That's the last laugh you will have tonight, I might as well tell you. I'd like to start this lecture with a statistic. The Minister for Justice invited me to preside over the new ceremonies for new citizens in 2006. And since, 2011. And since that date, the state has conferred citizenship on 107,000 new citizens. 107,000 in 6 years. From 180 countries. It's a sobering figure when you look at it. And suddenly, in a period of 10 or 15 years, we have become multicultural. From a monocultural society to a multicultural society. And Galway, I notice, is the most multicolored city in Ireland. So I'm not telling you anything new. I was asked at a conference lately by a professor of refugee studies, when she heard this figure, and what do you say to these people? She was interested in the tone of the welcome and what we were saying to these new people when they got their degrees. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I say to them. I say to them, first of all, when the state honors you today by granting you citizenship, it does not require that you forget the country you came from. It does not ask you to erase your memories or your personal and unique history. When you make your declaration of fidelity to the state in a moment, do not forget the country, your own people, your own traditions. Such memories are not contraband. Bring with you your songs, your music, and your stories. Someday your children or your children's children will ask you about their grandparents and will inquire about the old country. Do not deny them their legacy. It is your duty and your responsibility to remind them of that part of their story that is to be found in another land. Towards the end of the remarks, I conclude by saying, my parents and my grandparents, back the generations, were born in this country. And for the most part, my family has lived in this country for centuries. But after this ceremony, I will have no greater legal rights in this country than you will have. Because under our Constitution, under your Constitution now, all citizens are equal. The new are equal to the old. There are no second-class or half citizens. You are, as well as I am, entitled to the full protection of the Constitution and the personal guarantees contained therein. In view of what I'm going to say later on about the Supreme Court's decision Those are important words. And what I try to do in delivering these remarks is to encourage the new citizens to integrate, not to change themselves, but to bring their diversity with them and to enrich our society. We're not afraid of what they have to bring. In fact, we embrace it. We are an island people. We are insular. In fact, it might be suggested, DNA-wise, that we're incestuous. So a good dollop of external infusion might not be a bad thing for this country. Maybe it would help our athletes to perform better in the Olympic Games. And I tell them that I look forward to the day when one of their children or one of their children's children lead the All-Ireland football team onto Croke Park or the All-Ireland hurling team at the Croke Park. And that's not so far-fetched. Last year, there was a gentleman left half forward for Mayo who had a Pakistani parents. There was a forward came on for Kerry Miners this year in the All-Ireland final whose parents were from Nigeria originally. So this is to be welcomed. I'll tell you a story, a simple story, because the story is everything, and everything is a story. I was driving from my home in Kells last November to Dublin on a Sunday morning about 10:30. The roads were quiet. As you would expect, the weather was dull, heavy, lead, gunmetal grey. Big cumulus bags of water threatening overhead. And I turned the corner as I was going into Navan, and suddenly my spirits lifted. There was a magnificent African woman dressed in African costume. She was about, 6 foot. She had a wonderful headdress, beautiful dress and a bustle, bright yellow and black slashes on it. She had a little boy in a blue suit on her right hand and a little girl with pigtails and bows on her left, and dutifully marching behind her husband in a blue suit as well. And they were heading to the Baptist church outside Navan. And my spirits rose. And figuratively, it seemed to me that this is what we would get from the diversity of these people. They will brighten our lives. They will bring the sunshine with them, color-wise, attitude-wise, and in every sense that we care for. I'm intrigued to some extent by what I've seen in the last 2 days. I went to John Behan's show last night, and I was struck by his beautiful sculptures, many of which were of the famine, and some of which were of the refugees. I hear Jessica with her poem on Mosney. I heard Paddy Glacken playing Glón na Galt. I grew up not far from Glón na Galt. It's a place outside Tralee on the way to Dingle, for few you don't know it. I wasn't kept there. So there's huge resonances in our art form to these things, if you look for it. And to some extent, why shouldn't we welcome these people? We are a nation of immigrants. The president yesterday told us there was over 90,000 Irish-born people in Australia at the moment. There are over 50,000 undocumented hanging around Boston somewhere. And we have been all over the world. Our missionaries have been all over the world. And some of you may say that kind of exercise is intrusive. But my own experience, and I had an aunt who spent 25 years in Nigeria, and I think she did mostly building houses, teaching, and running a hospital. I don't think there was a lot of proselytizing going on directly. And how can we now look at people from these countries who said, yes, your message was very good, we'd like to come to Ireland? Well, welcome, bring them on, that's what I would say. We are a country, as I say, of immigrants. We understand dislocation. I'm reminded of that wonderful book by Sean O'Toole and Tom Kinsella, The Dispossessed. And I don't have to say much more referring to our history. We were all dispossessed. This hell out the Connacht, you know, the immigration boats. So we don't have to be told about the pain, or we shouldn't have to be told about the pain of people in direct provision or people coming to this country from lesser well-off countries, if I might put it that way. Some people say that the Irish are racist. I'd like to address that. I don't believe it for a minute. If you look at the crime statistics, the Garda statistic, no, I know I'm on tricky ground, quoting Guard statistics, but the devil cited scripture for his own purposes. But it's all we have. And do you know how many crime, hate incidents there were in the country in 2016? 198. Crime incidents, that's hate incidents, race incidents. It would be a bad poke fair that you wouldn't get that on a Monday morning in the district court after 168. No, I'm not for a moment suggesting that any of these should be trivialized. Each of these is a serious matter. But we don't have the hate race thing in this country, in my experience. I have interviewed many of the asylum seekers in the direct provision when we went around doing our research. I asked them pointedly that question. Most of them said that they didn't see it. They said there's some bit of it here, there was a bit of it there, some fellow shouted on a bus. But by and large, if you look at that series in the Irish Times, New to Our Parish, and I have no doubt the Irish Times would publish it if it were otherwise. But I don't see any of them ever saying that they were discriminated on the basis of race. I have no doubt some of it goes on. I'm not naive. I have had a legal career, I'm not naive. But in terms of being bad racist in the big sense, I don't think we are, and I don't think we have anything to fear about. The same statistics, by the way, said that there were 6 times more racial incidents, hate incidents, in the north of Ireland than there is in the south. And that's not always against Pakistanis and Africans. It's probably Protestant against Catholic and Catholic against Protestant. So let's not get exaggerated in these matters. There are ignorant people, there are juvenile people, there are uneducated people who will throw slurs sometimes. But as I say, when the Mayo people go up to Dublin for an All-Ireland, there's many of them jeered as being cultures and so forth and so on. And that's not about race or about colour, it's something else. And I think that a lot of that is trivial. It's not terribly important in terms of a deep characteristic in the race. Direct provision. Now, I want to contrast what I've just said about the 107,000. These are 107,000 people who came lawfully to this country, took up jobs, worked for 5 years and more, and then applied for citizenship. They paid their taxes, and they were visible people who were contributing to the economy. Contrast that spirit of generosity with direct provision, where we're talking about perhaps 8,000 moving up and down in direct provision. Now let me define direct provision, because some of you lay people might not appreciate what it means, and there's a lot of confusion on it. Direct provision is used in two senses. First of all, we talk about direct provision as a system of payment. And second of all, we talk about direct provision as the centres, buildings where people stay. So if you keep that distinction in your mind, some of the confusion will fall away. Let's talk about direct provision as a system. When Ireland, as a member of the Community of Nations, signed conventions in 1951 with regard to asylum and refugees, they undertook to deal with asylum seekers who were fetched up on our shores in a certain way. They were assessed, details were taken, and they were subjected to an application process. Now, a person coming into the country as an asylum seeker might look for three different kinds of status. He or she might say he wants to be classified as a refugee. That's the highest standard you can get, because there are a lot of protections going at international law for people who are refugees. And there's a definition of what a refugee is. It's a person who is in fear of returning home to his country because of persecution, either racial, cultural, or otherwise. If he or she fails in that, he then can apply for a different category, what we call subsidiary protection. And this is a status that the European Union has adopted. It's lower down, and it's more easier to get into subsidiary protection. If you can't get into it, you still have to get in there. And the third category is, if you fail in the first two, you can apply for leave to remain. You apply to the government and say, we'd like to stay. And the government has a certain course of discretion to allow it or not. Now, the problem with our system is that when people 10 years ago came in, and more, 15 years ago, 2000, they applied in this Byzantine fashion system, and they were involved in 3 separate legal cases, successively. They weren't all dealt with together, they were dealt with successively. So you applied for refugee status. If you failed, you could appeal that. That took another year. And after that, if you did, you might challenge it and go to the courts. And if you failed there, you could start again at the next session, subsidiary protection. And if you refused, appeal it. And if you refused, go to the court. So it was inevitable that the process was going to be long and drawn out. Now, one of the improvements that have been recently made is that the government introduced the International Protection Act in 2016, which telescopes all these 3 hearings into one hearing. And the theory is that it should now take about 1/3 of the time that it used to take in processing these people. The process meant that people had to continually stay in direct provision while the process was ongoing. They couldn't take up work, they couldn't travel, they had no status, so they had to wait. And this meant that some of the people in the direct provision centres were there for 7, 8, 10 years, waiting for a result. And for that delay, in my view, our government was responsible and culpable. They made an international convention that they would deal and process people, and implicit in that is that they would deal and process them properly and in a timely fashion. And if they don't and didn't, then, in my view, that's a fault. Now, the government was aware of this criticism, and In 2014, they asked me to chair a working group. And a working group was a very interesting body. It had about 34, 35 people, composed and comprised of many civil servants, which was a new, interesting thing. There was people from the civil service on the various departments on it. There was outstanding individuals, former secretary of the department, outstanding trade unionists, and there was all the NGOs were represented. The non-governmental agencies who were interested in refugees was there. So we had about 34 or 35 on the group. We worked quite hard and quite quickly, and by June 2015 we had a report. We made 173 recommendations. And the two important and outstanding recommendations that concerned us was the length of time that people stayed in direct provision. And secondly, that people did not have the right to work. Now, there was a whole lot of other things we were concerned, but those were the two big issues. With regard to the length of time, I don't have to elaborate what damage it will do to people if they are kept in places where they have to stay for 10 years. The damage it does to their dignity, to their self-esteem, and to their very, what shall I say, personality is huge. And in many cases, in my view, irreversible. The hope was, we recommended that the government would bring in the new system, 1 instead of 3, in the hope that if they put in the resources, you would clear the system quicker and that people would get a decision within 12 months or 18 months at most. We also realized, however, that unless the government invested in the new system, you would get a backlog again. A second problem that we found was that there was already a backlog in the system. So before you could go to a tabula rasa of a new system, you had to get rid of the backlog of 4,000 or 5,000 people, many of whom were there for 5 years or more. So we suggested that the 5-year plus, what we call the long stairs, should be dealt with quickly and swiftly and given leave to remain, so that that would be cleared out of the system and the new system would deal with people as they're coming in. The government did not accept that provision in principle. They said it was too dangerous, etc. There'd be a pull factor, and so forth and so on. But I will say this into the government, that while they didn't accept it in principle or explicitly, behind the scenes, they did work to reduce the number of 5-year people. And that number now has shrunk to about 500 or 600, I think, at the moment. So the government must get credit for that. With regard to the physical centres, the direct provision centres, we have 34 of those in the country. And they're a disparate group of buildings and properties. Some of them are old secondary schools. Some of them, like Mosney, is a former holiday camp. Some of them are institutions, former residential institutions. So there's a variety of them around the place. And they differ. And they're not all even in the sense that there's not a model one, so that some people will say, I was in Athlone and it's terrible, I'd like to be in Hatch Hall. Or I was in Hatch Hall and there's a Clondalkin, it's terrible. We visited all the direct provision centres when we made our report, and we pointed out the flaws and the difficulties and the problems. They represented crowded conditions, number one. Many of the women and husbands and women with children were in what was formerly a hotel bedroom, living in that kind of situation. No specific place for the children to do their homework, you know. woman told me she had to shout at her son to get out of the toilet so her little sister could do her homework on the toilet seat. You have lack of privacy. Many of the couples, the women in particular, complained about the lack of privacy. Not that they were exposed to everyone, but even with their family. They have teenage sons, teenage daughters, taking a shower, having relationships with their husband and wife. Not easy, stressful. Also, a disparate group of different nationalities in these places. And we think, you know, in our innocence, that they're all the same. All these asylum seekers are the same. They're not us, therefore they must be the same. But I questioned a manager who had decided he would try to be helpful, and he put 4 Nigerians in the one room in a centre, and the Nigerians nearly killed each other. And I don't mean that, but they were not aware that some North Nigeria is so different from South Nigeria, or East Nigeria and West Nigeria. Very, very different. And to be insensitive to that kind of thing was a complaint that was made to us. There was no cooking facilities. This has got a lot of publicity lately. They couldn't cook a meal. Everything was handed to them. You had to be down at breakfast. You got the breakfast, what it was, basic. Edible? No doubt. You came in at lunch and you got a basic meal. Edible? I've eaten in many of these places. I've come into these places unannounced and lined up with the residents and had a meal. And I could quite easily eat it. Whether I could eat it day after day, year after year, for 8 years, I doubt. So there's a variety of centres. The conflict of different nationalities. We came across a room one time where there was a fellow from Morocco up in a double bed, and there was 2 beds upstairs, and he was up in the, looking at Manchester United versus, you know, someone on a mobile television, and the Muslim was trying to say his prayers in between the beds. So you had that kind of conflict in a confined space. Very, very difficult, to say the least. And all of this monotony was lived in with no end in sight, no certainty, no hope, no knowledge of where and when it was going to end. Kafkaesque is the word I would have used in describing some of them. And many of these people, these residents, were damaged. Their self-esteem was broken. Their self-respect and their dignity was lost. I'm not going to go on any more of that, because in a moment after this lecture, I will be talking to Blessing, who will give her own testimony of living for 7 or 8 years in a direct provision centre. And it's better and more powerful if her story is told in her own voice. The length of the legal process was not solved immediately by the new system. And that was partly because the backlog came in and it prevented the transition smoothly to the new system. I will focus now, if I might, on one particular problem that I personally saw as being very, very acute when we visited the centres, and that was they had not got the right to work. And this, with the boredom, the ennui, the monotony, meant that these people were dehumanized. You go into a centre and you see these young men, and they're going around almost hollowed out, is the word I use to express. The sparkle had gone from their eyes. They were dull. They were dehumanized. And I spoke to one man, I remember vividly, at one of the centres, and I said, how are you getting on today? I was referring to his legal position, what stage in the process was he? And he said, forget about my papers, forget about my legal thing. All I want to do is get up in the morning, put on my clothes, have my breakfast with my wife and children, and go to work. I will work for nothing. And I want to come home in the evening and sit down with my wife and children and say to my children, today I worked. Now that kind of testimony is huge. And it's very common. And when people were driven to that kind of isolation, their self-esteem is gone. They become depressed. They become de-skilled. Any skills there, and many of the people, the asylum are skilled people, different skills. But after 8 years, without using their skills, they're not skilled anymore. And if they're fortunate to be in the 15% that wins the raffle, that gets permission to stay in one status or another, they're now not suitable to integrate. Their skills have gone. Their socialization, they're institutionalized. Many of them are on medication. Valium, the women will tell you that in particular. So the combination, therefore, of the length of time that you're to stay here with the right of, or the condition of idleness is a powerful cocktail which can dehumanize all of these people. It's shown by international research that the benefits of employment are undeniable. For instance, if these people were given, if the residents were given the right to work, let's say after 6 months, 9 months. We're the only country, by the way, with Latvia in Europe who does not give the right to work to asylum seekers after 9 months. All the rest of Europe do it. Why we don't do it, I don't know. And contrast what is open to it. Our generous approach to new citizens who have a bit of paper when they come in, maybe. So if you gave the people in direct provision the right to work, we would be harmonized with the other European countries. It has been undeniably recognized that working promotes health and well-being. It facilitates integration. When they get the right to stay, they are much better able to integrate because they've had a job, they've been in society, they have been mixing. It promotes self-sufficiency and independence, whereas to deny it promotes dependency and institutionalized thinking. And furthermore, it enhances the dignity of the individual. These are undeniable benefits to the right to work. And our report unequivocally suggested that anyone who has not got a decision, first instance decision, within 9 months should be allowed to work immediately. That was not done. The government did not allow that. Interestingly enough then, what happened? The matter was taken to the Supreme Court by one resident, gentleman from Burma, who decided that he would sue the state and base an argument not on the Immigration Act or the legislation, the local legislation, but on human rights. We heard Paddy Glacken and Napoleon's The Rights of Man. And he decided that he would make an argument to our Supreme Court on a human rights basis. He pleaded the Charter of the European Union. He pleaded the Convention on Human Rights, the Strasbourg Convention. But he also based his argument on the Irish Constitution, Bunreacht na Héireann. And he succeeded. And it's interesting because the title of this is The Right to Rights. And the Supreme Court, to its credit, held that an asylum seeker in his position had a right to work. That was the bottom line. It first of all held that they would continue to hear it even though the applicant had got his papers halfway through the case, and the case had become moot in the sense that it was no longer an issue for this man. So the courts in many cases in that type of situation will say, well, he has no more complaints, he's got his paper, he can work away, we will stop hearing it. But they considered in this case that there was an important point of law, of general importance, that they would continue to hear it even though his case was resolved. The second thing that the Supreme Court held was that there is a right to work in the Constitution. Now, there was a serious jurisprudence on that, but the jurisprudence that existed was not very well defined or clarified. And so the right to work was trotted out sometimes without any inquisition as to what exactly the right to work meant. And the Supreme Court referred to that the right to work is a bit vague, but nevertheless there is a right to work in this situation. They also related to the Section 41 of the Constitution, the equality section, which says that all citizens shall, as human persons, be held equal before the law. All citizens were held equal. The question then was, asylum seekers aren't citizens, and how are they going to benefit from this? But the court held that an asylum seeker might benefit from that, even though they are not citizens. I'll just quote one bit from the Supreme Court, which is telling. It said, a right to work, at least in the sense of freedom to work or seek employment, is a part of the human personality. And accordingly, the Article 40.1 requirements that individuals as human persons are required to be held equal before the law means that those aspects of the right which are part of human personality cannot be withheld absolutely from citizens. It goes on, and it says, accordingly, in principle, Mr. Justice McDonald said, I would be prepared to hold that in the circumstances where there is no temporal limit on asylum process and there is an absolute prohibition on seeking employment contained in the Act is contrary to the constitutional right to seek employment. Now that was very strong language and a strong recognition. It, in fact, mirrored what we said in our report, that we felt from a moral point of view. We didn't argue on constitutional rights or legal rights, we just argued the moral position was that people like this should be allowed to work. The Supreme Court, however, paid respect to the other sections in the Constitution, the separation of powers section, which says, it's not for us, the Supreme Court, to make the laws on when they're right to work, but we're telling you the absolute ban that you have on the right to work is wrong, and you better come up with an alternative. So they sent the government away, and the government is due to come back to the Supreme Court in next month with their solution as to how they're doing it. And I only hope that the government's response is generous and that they don't take a mean, narrow view of what they might do. The Supreme Court did not say you cannot distinguish between asylum seekers and citizens. They didn't say that. They said in some cases you might be able to make a distinction, but not in this one. So it's up to the government now, and hopefully the government will adopt the European position, which is the right to work after 9 months, which is what we had recommended in it. It would seem to be contradictory to their position and the generous position they have in granting new citizens. I'm coming to the end, but someone is citing poetry early on, and someone asked me recently, was writing the report worthwhile because the government didn't embrace it. And remember, the government set it up, and the government had their people on it, so that every recommendation we made was passed by the civil servants who had got the clearance from the Secretary General of their departments. And yet, when it came to government, they dragged their feet on it. Am I pessimistic? Should we never have done it? We should have done it. There are many reasons why I am proud that we did it and that the people involved did such a good work and recommended. First of all, it was well received by the government, by the Oireachtas, by the Dáil and the Seanad. It was complimented, etc., etc. Secondly, it brought all the stakeholders, I hate that word stakeholders, but it's handy, together. All the people who are interested in representing the NGOs, the government, and the interested individuals, and asylum seekers themselves from direct provision. It brought them together, and they're speaking to each other. And that can't be bad. It should be emphasized that we were asked to look at the current system. We were not asked to invent a new system. Our terms of reference confined us to the direct provision as it was, to make improvements in that. Fourthly, this, our working group report, sets out a programme, and the government are following the programme, patchy and all as their efforts are, but there's a programme there. They can't say there's no programme there. They can say we can't do that, or we're trying our best, okay, but the programme is set. And the report keeps an agenda alive. And this is very important. That's why this lecture and this kind of discussion is so important. These residents must not be forgotten. We cannot brush them aside. We have enough stains on our history in relation to residential institutions and other institutions recently to let this continue. There have been some positive gains too. The government did agree that the ombudsman could take complaints from the residents in the system, both the ombudsman and the children's ombudsman. So if children have a complaint, they have a person to make it to now. And there is some effort made to improve the cooking conditions. The children's allowance, we recommended that the allowance, adults get €19 a week. Now, I ask you, €19. And many of the centres are out in the country. So if you get a bus to the nearest place, there's not always transport. You have to pay the bus. You don't have free travel. You have to pay the bus. And if you go into town to walk around the shopping mall, enviously looking at things in windows, without any money in your pocket, $3.50 will take a cup of coffee. Where's 19? Children were given €9. How are you going to clothe and shoe children? Children is under 18. You know, a 14-year-old boy goes through shoes, you know, as anyone knows. And they're €100 a head, these sneakers. And these are not brands. These are just ordinary sneakers. Where are you going to get the money for it? And to the credit of the government, they have more recently introduced an integration policy. So they are addressing the issues of how people will integrate. We've seen it in Balladureen and all these people around. This is a special program. But how do people integrate? Oh, we only have to look at France to learn the lesson of non-integration and how the Algerians were huddled away and herded away in corners. And what kind of a tinderbox do you have there now? So if the people are coming and if they're to integrate, they must integrate. I think I'll finish there, but since everyone is citing poetry, I might as well do it too. I started with a statistic, but I'll finish with a poem. It's a poem by Langston Hughes, the American jazz poet. It's called I Too. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. It's wonderful. I want to introduce the poet Christina O'Barrow.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Dr. Bryan McMahon, for that speech. I was truly moved by it. Thank you for standing for us. Thank you very much. I'll start with a poem titled In an Unknown Land, and I hope you enjoy it. I try to fit in. In my nature and my culture, we respect people older than we are. Yes, looking one into his or her eyes is a sign of disrespect. Becoming too polite was the best I thought. I tried it. In the mall, everywhere I go. The results were way beyond normal. I was treated like a puppet. A sponge, they called me. Even if one stepped on me, I said I was sorry. It didn't help. I was a typical example of a true Christian. When slapped on one cheek, turn the other. If I take off my native attire, will it make a difference? If I knot my tie firmly and strongly like the Irish, would it change who I am? Will it make a difference? Then, what must I do in a land so perfect, so peaceful, yet so strange? In a land still blinded to see the beauty it possesses? In a land in which I am judged by the wrong of a sister I don't know. A land that once suffered famine, hunger, castration, now looks at me in the same situation as the upbringer of hunger. What must I do? What must I do? I shall have nowhere to go, nowhere to run. In an unknown land so beautiful, yet so strange. Thank you very much. Now the second one is titled, Let Me Sleep. I hope you enjoy it too. She turned restless, back and forth, struggling through the night. She wanted to sleep, she tried to sleep. The day ahead was long. She tried to stand, the cock was crowing, yet she cannot stand. She is tired. Sleepy through the night. She tried to sleep, waking up was a fight. How do you sleep, yet not sleep? Wake, yet can't stand. I hear you sleep to rest, but she sleeps and slums. I want to wake, I want to run. I want to leave and not scream. When will I be a woman? I waddle through the mud, the quicksand where I was born. Every day, I live with a wish. I see people around sink as we wade together. People close to me, people I will remember. Come save me, take my hand. My voice echoed through the hills. Britain came with a tale of a visa. I wish I was told it is a monster, an empire that turned my land into this mud. But here she is offering me her tale, a way out of this mud. I grabbed it. I see no monster, I see a savior, flying in red, white, and blue. For once I smiled, see my mud down below. I have escaped, have gone. My savior, oh my savior, should I follow her to a nest? Should I jump off somewhere, someplace I would feel safer, a place without the reputes of monsters? Down below I see a woman like myself, wrapped in colors of green, white, and orange. She's so beautiful with kind eyes. I let loose, I land. It was soft, I am saved. Shall I build a house? Shall I leave right now? Let me sleep, let me wake. But the sand is soft, maybe too soft. I am sinking, I can't understand. I see her, she has many children. The hateful ones are called the right wing. They all fear them and they all scream. You can't sleep, you can't wake. Your mud is not entirely all muddy. Some parts are hard. Go back to your mud. Our ground is all hard. We made it hard. Now we sleep, not like you. It's your fault. We don't share. Go away. Oh, let them stay, let them walk. I hear some Irish say, we share, we love, we are Irish, not sinners. Okay, you can walk, said the Fallaghan. He is Irish, he listens. Thank you, oh, thank you. I know the pressure from Mr. Wright, but please never forget. As I lay still awake, still in my mud, see my mud. I see no land, let me sleep, let me wake. I am all tired, let me sleep. Thank you very much.
Now, I think I am to invite Blessing up onto the stage, and we will have a conversation about her experiences, and we will then follow it with a question and answer system. Are there microphones? Yeah, thank you. Hello?
Thank you, Brian.
Am I working? Yeah. You're very welcome, Blessing.
Thank you very much. Thank you
As
for
you-
having me.
As you will have noticed, I left out a good bit about how the living conditions in direct provision are. You might tell the people here, the audience, what it was like to live for 8 years in direct provision and how you matured from it. And then we may ask you afterwards, now that you're out of direct provision, what is the difference to you personally and your family?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me, and good evening to everyone. My name is Blessing Moyo. I lived in the Eglinton for 7.5 years. And during the time I lived there, I lived with my 3 children, my 2 teenagers, Victoria, who was, when she first came in, she was 11, and then we left there when she was just turned 18. And I had a son who was Emmanuel, who's now just 17. And I have a little boy, Alexander, who's 7 now. So in all the 7.5 years that I lived in the Eglinton, I lived in one room with the 3 of my children. So you can just imagine, 17, 16, these are teenagers. They need their space. They have their moods as children. But I had to endure. I had to live with them under the same roof, in the same room, every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours, because I wasn't allowed to work, so I had to be there with them all the time. And the experience that I had during that time was the dignity, my own dignity. I felt like I was just stripped of my own dignity, because you can imagine, as a mother, living, sleeping in the same room with your own children, especially my son. And the other thing that I felt was stripped from me was my right to be a mother, to cook for my children, because that is something that I was not allowed to do. And for every mother, for every family, for every child, the things that we remember are the things that our parents did for us when we were young. The gathering that we used to have and to have a meal on the same table with our parents, the story that they told during that time. But I never gave that to my children, because every time we made sure that 5 o'clock, 5:30, they didn't even wait for me. Like Alex at 4, he used to know that he can run down by himself and go and eat and come back. So there was no table manners that I had as a man. I mean, a chance to teach my children the table manners, the things that we use. Like, I'm a Christian. We believe in praying when we are having a meal. I didn't get a chance to teach my children that. And the truth is that I will never get that time back. That 7.5 years, which was taken from me, from my children, I won't have that back. And the other thing, for those that were single people, I feel like I was blessed, even if it was a blessing in disguise. I'm not going to take that as a bad thing, because I got the opportunity to experience both, living as a single person and living with my own children. When I first came in Ireland, I had left my children, and I came straight from Dublin. I came straight to the Eglinton, where I lived with 4 other women in the room. And what I always remember, and what I always say to my friends and my children, I remember during that time, I was going through a rough time. I was depressed. I was taking medication. And I remember this girl who was also in the same room with me. She used to call me that I'm mad. But the funny part about it, again, because I was taking these tablets, she used to turn around and steal them and drink them herself. So my question was, who was mad now? You know, because at least I can go get them from the hospital, but she was stealing them from me. Even saying that, I don't blame her. I was strong enough to go to the doctor and say, I have a problem. But she wasn't strong enough to do that. So in a way, it was bad that she was stealing them from me, because I wasn't sure whether they were good for her own health. But if I managed to make her have some of them, and if they were helping her, that was good enough for me, because I knew that at least my strength to be able to go to the GP and get them, it was helping her as well. I remember these women used to, as Brian said earlier on, they used to take knives and stand up and pull out knives on each other, wanting to kill each other. They will be fighting, boxing in the room. Imagine you are crying, going through your own problem. The other person is crying, going through their own problem. The two are fighting, boxing. And for most asylum seekers, the reason why we left our homes is because of fighting. So imagine if your wounds are still open, and then here are some people again fighting blood on each other because of the anger. And if I looked at it again, the anger was from the way they lived, the space. We were so confined. As women, 4 of us in one room. That was just terrible. And I think that, to say it's still going on as I speak. I have friends of mine who live in the Eglinton as I speak. I think there are 3, 4 in a room, and I'm sure the fight still goes on. And after all that, I'm going to move on from the stories that I've just said, and then I'll come to the children. Direct provision is not a place for children. By children being in direct provision, we are denying them their rights of being children. And being a child is not something that you can say, I'll pack it for 7.5 years and then I'll come back and get it back. Once it's gone, it's gone. And that's exactly what was done to my own children. That is exactly what was done to other children. And that is the same thing which is still done to the children who are living in direct provision now. And my question is, we turn around and say, oh, these new communities that are coming in, the children, oh, they're very naughty, they're doing that. But can't we see what we are doing? Can't we see that we are the same people who are breathing those same kind of people that we will see in future? As Brian said, let's look at what is happening in France. Is that what we want to see here in Ireland? Which I believe all of us, it's not what we see, what we want. But if we are not careful, if we let direct provision continue, that's exactly what we are doing to our children.
Could I ask you, since you got your papers and you have left the centre,
Yes.
how are you getting on now? I should say, by the way, for clarification, that asylum seekers, when they come to this country, do not have to go into the centres. It's not mandatory. If you can make your own way outside of direct provisions and register, you're free to stay out. But no one, you'll get no allowance, you'll get no food, you'll get no bed, etc. So unless you have family already in the country, or friends in the country, or you have some kind of intellectual wit to make ends meet outside, you'll get nothing from the state if you don't go into the centre. Sorry. After you left, how did you get in? How did you get accommodation? Which is a huge problem now. And you know that in recent times, recent weeks, the government has issued a notice to quit for some applicants who have got their papers, but they can't move out. There's 600 or so. And now they're being almost referred to as bed blockers. But they've got their papers, but they have no money. They haven't got the money to make a deposit in an apartment. They haven't got the money for the first month's rent because they were prevented from working for it. And now they're going to be told where they're going to get out of the centres. Where are they going to go? They'll become homeless. And the state, they will not be entitled to any social welfare. They will be destitute, homeless on our streets.
I'll come back to that point again, Brian, of being free to live outside if you have family. It's said on a piece of paper, but in reality, it's not what it is. And if you try to go and live outside because you have your friends or you have family, you will be punished for that. And the way they are going to punish you, they will make sure that you rot in the hostel for 7, 8, 9 years. I have people who did that. They're right here in the audience as we speak, and that's exactly what they're going through. One of the girls here, she's going to be 10 years in the hostel. And it was all because she decided to go and live with a friend outside. So that is what is said on the paper, but it's not something that I would advise, especially those who are in direct provision, to do, because you pay dearly for it. And also, and then now coming back to the moving out of the hostel, it's even harder when you go out, because I remember when I got my papers, I was very excited that finally after 7.5 years, I'm gonna be out of here. But it was just the beginning of more problems. Because when I got my papers, within 2 weeks, I received a letter from the Department of Justice asking me to leave the hostel or they would throw me out. That was after 7.5 years. I lived in the Eglinton. I wasn't allowed to work. I didn't even have a cent in my own wallet. But I received a letter from the Department of Justice telling me that I should move because they don't have business with me anymore. So I went to the social welfare the social welfare, I was told to go to the city council where I had to apply for help. For help to process my rent allowance, it took them 3 months, 3 full months. But I had to be out of the hostel because the Department of Justice was writing me, telling me to get out. At the same time, I had managed to get a landlord who was willing to take me. But at the same time, the landlord wanted his rent, his first month rent. He wanted his deposit. I didn't have any of those. And I had to start running around now. From having 0, I had to start running around again, asking friends for money to help me to deposit the flat and to pay the rent for me, which I was very fortunate enough because I've been here in Galway, like I'm gonna be 10 years in December next year. So I've made friends. But at the same time, through that, they managed to pay the first rent for me and the deposit for me. But as I say, I didn't get any support from the social welfare for 4 full months. So I had to continue asking for friends, including the food to be able to put on the table for myself and my children. And I tried to get a job, but every time when I applied for a job, the response I got was, we want 3 years experience. So how am I going to get the 3 years experience if I wasn't allowed to work for 7.5 years? Which is that, again, now it's a blockage. I can't work even if I am capable to work because I don't have that 3 years experience they want. So it's hard. It's better for people to be allowed to work when they're in the hostel because first of all, they can be able to save money. When they get their papers, they'll be able to deposit their houses for themselves. They'll be able maybe to support themselves for 2 months. But if you are not allowed to work, when you get out there, it's even more difficult and there is no support. And I don't know what the government is doing about that. Maybe you can help me with that. And
Not the government.
I know. Yeah.
Could you tell me about your children? You did say to me earlier on today that you have a young chap who is a good rugby player.
Yes.
He's 17, he's big, he could aspire to great things, but he's not Irish.
Yeah.
And to be Irish, he has to be 5 years living here before he can apply for it. And the time inside indirect provision doesn't count.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So
he is a potential, scrum half or whatever, but he can't play for Ireland or for anyone because of this.
He always tells me that he plays second row. He's the captain of his team in the school, and he plays for NYG here, the club. He just turned 17 on Thursday, and he's 6'2". So he's a big man, and he's a good rugby player. He loves his rugby. But as I said, now instead of playing for the 16 or under, he's playing for 18 now because he's a good player. And he is able, because of his body, he is even able to play with the bigger ones. So very soon he will be 19 and he will qualify to play maybe for Connacht under 19. So if they don't give him that residence, is he going to be applying for a visa all the time when he's trying to travel with the other teammates? Which is a problem.
Would he be able to play with the national team? I don't
He won't
think so.
be able to play with the national team.
He could play with Connacht.
Yeah, but not with the national team.
I mean, it just seems appalling that the 7 years spent in custody cannot be counted towards the 5-year residency. It just seems over cruel. As I say, the delay is caused by the government not being able to have a proper legal system to deal and process people coming in quickly. And the failure is, as has gone to 7 and 10 years in some cases.
Yeah,
so you have compounding the thing. It's your fault as a government not to do it. And then to compound it, you say, well, you still have to do your 5 years.
Yeah, which really, it just doesn't make sense. Do they need someone to take it to court again, like this man who took it to court, for them to understand that people have to have the right to work? It's the same thing like what we are talking about. And the other problem that I have is, like, we have kids who were born in the hostel. Like, I know a child who's now 15. You know, he was born in the hostel, he's 15, he got themselves, I think they got leave to remain. So is he going to wait again another 5 years for him until he's 20, for him to be accepted that he's Irish when he was born here? He knows nothing about Nigeria, he's from Ireland, he was born here in Galway Hospital. So does he really have to wait 20 years for someone to recognize that he is Irish? And what is it going to take, I mean, for the government to realize that?
But perhaps this might be a good time to open it up to the floor, and I might take a couple of questions from the floor in sequence. Sorry, lady in the corner. Okay, have we a mic there? Fergus.
I'd like to begin by thanking all the contributors this evening and to ask a question really about something, Dr. McMahon, you said you don't know the answer to, but I want you to speculate if you would. I'm really struck by how much of what's been described is the detail of administration and the legal system. And my question is, why do you think it is that Ireland and Latvia, I'm not interested in Latvia really, but why do you think it is that Ireland cannot allow rights to be acknowledged? And the same is true with regard to people with disabilities and others. There are rights in Ireland that we just refuse to allow. And I'd like to understand, what do you think it is in our political and public life that denies rights?
Well, one of the fears, and this was expressed in the Supreme Court by the Irish government, was what is known as the pull factor. This is a short way of saying that if you make life easy in Ireland for asylum seekers, then we will be inundated by asylum seekers all over. You know, they'll come to Ireland because there's a great deal to be dealt with there. Now, I just want to say two things. Since our report was published, the landscape has changed. The world, the global landscape. It's estimated now that there are 62 million dislocated people in the world, of whom 21 million are refugees. That's a figure that's quite stunning. You will see the hostile reaction that Angela Merkel, who did the right thing, in my view, a moral decision to take 800,000 into her country, and the backlash, the political backlash from that. You will see the acts of terrorism, which may have nothing to do with asylum seekers, but it goes into people's heads that this is against, you know, terrorists, and we have to control it. But we have two other factors. We have Brexit, and we have Mr. Trump. Now, all of those things happened since our report was published, and we have that iconic, unforgettable picture of the child on the Mediterranean sand. So, unless people become articulate and reason and pester their politicians, the politicians won't move. There are no votes in direct provision. That's a short response. It's not an answer, you know. But we haven't had a great tradition, as you say, in our religious institutions, and not just the religious institutions, the state institutions, the reformatory schools and all these, and our prisons. We don't seem to have, in certain aspects of things, the humanity that we seem to be showing at the new citizen ceremonies that I'm presiding over Monday. So there is a paradox, there is a contradiction somewhere in it, and I don't know how it is to be resolved.
I think Brian is right, and it's our responsibility, ourselves as citizens, because first of all, we have to understand that the government that is in power, we put them there. And if we don't agree with what they are doing, I think it's our responsibility to stand up and say, you know what, if you continue doing this, you are not going to get my vote, and stand by that. That's the only way we can change things. There is no other way.
There's a hand up at the back there, and I can only see a blue sleeve, but we'll elect it. There's two people who want to speak there, so they might speak in succession. We'll have a response then. You might stand up if you might. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. My question really, I know you highlighted two main areas, which is employment and the system, as well as the conditions in which people are actually housed. But there's another link, I wonder whether that's addressed in your report, which is the education link, key to people spending such a long time in the direct provision system and only being allowed to do mostly level 2, 3, 4 KQI in terms of qualifications. When it comes to accreditation, it's little, and it's on a really, at the most, some people even struggle to get education in the level, let's say level 6 or going onwards. It's very, very difficult for people to access meaningful educational qualification system. Level 3, level 4, what can you do? Or most of the times, people run around, they do a lot of programs, but they're actually unaccredited. So what's in your report, does that issue come up? Because education is key to employment. Education is key to actually a lot of advancements if people should do well in direct provision.
If I might just respond to that while I think of it. I think the point you're making is that you can go so far in the direct provision with education. They will teach up to FT4, I think is the level. After that, there is no system to further your education. This is partly due to the fact that the assistance for further education is linked to unemployment. The unemployed, if they fall out of employment as a citizen here and you're unemployed, then a lot of the educational assistance kicks in. But since people in direct provision can never be employed, they can't be unemployed. And they can't access the educational grants and subsidies and things that are out there. That's part of the reason, and we raised that in our report and made some recommendations about it. Sorry, there's a gentleman, and then I'll come to you.
Joe Loughnane, Chairman of the Galway Anti-Racist Network. I just want to thank Blessing, first of all, for sharing her experiences with us here. She's a fine example of a Galway citizen. I have two comments to make, and it's one thing that hasn't been mentioned here tonight at all. It's about deportation. A lot of people believe that the new single application procedure is just a quicker way to deport people. And when we talk about direct provision and when we talk about asylum seekers in this country, we don't talk about raids by the Garda National Immigration Bureau at night, raiding Nigerian parties in Dublin, raiding people's houses in Cork and Galway, people being dragged out and put on flights and sent back to a country that they fled from. We need to be talking about deportation. We need to be talking about how our own legal system can deal with people if they are criminals, that we deal with them here. But more specifically, we need to talk about the fact that now this is a single application procedure. Is this not just a quicker way of getting rid of asylum seekers in this country? Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not privy to the information that you seem to be privy to, but I will say this, that there are 600 people with deportation orders in direct provision at the moment, and they've been there for, in some cases, several years. And the government know they're here, they're there, they have deportation orders. But the government cannot willy-nilly and they won't willy-nilly, deport people to parts of the world where there's war going on and it's unsafe. Syria, they will deport no one to Syria at the minute. And so I'm sure, I'm not sure, I don't know what you're saying, I take you on your word, but there's 600 people who have deportation orders in direct provision at the moment, and they're being called bed blockers now because the government won't deport them. So there's something else going on there. Sorry, no, we have Ellie? Yeah?
I just want to say something to the gentleman who talked about education, especially for asylum seekers and people who are living in direct provision. That is something we've been complaining for a very long time, and it's just not happening. But on top of that, I just want to let you know that it's not only asylum seekers, because even people who got their refugee status, they are not allowed to go to third level education until they're at least 3 years in the country, which I don't understand why it's that way. But it's not just asylum seekers.
No, Ellie.
Thank you.
Would you like to turn around maybe and address the audience?
It wasn't my day, Judge, today, so I didn't want to. Okay, my name is Ellie Kisiombe, and I'm a woman living in direct provision for 8 years. And I'm a campaigner, so Judge knows me well because I'm one of the people who pulled him up to, to push for the working group. So I just want to address a few things which I noted when the judge was speaking. As a woman living in direct provision on the 11th of November, 2017, I'll be 9 years still in direct provision. And as pushing my boundaries in direct provision, trying to do something like setting up our table and even campaigning for asylum seekers, I've come in contact with many things which my experience has taught me to feel in a way that the government is still punishing us as asylum seeker by not allowing us to work. And you've just mentioned something which you've said, asylum seekers, it's not a mandatory or compulsory to live in direct provision. We can choose to live outside of direct provision. Judge, I'm coming from Malawi, and when I was fleeing from Malawi, I was fleeing for persecution. That means my journey was not prepared. And when I was arriving in Dublin, I didn't even have any money and even my children with me. So how can I come to Ireland and seek asylum and decide to live outside direct provision? Which that's the only means I can live in Ireland by sitting in direct provision and abide by the law and laws that the government is setting us. I think that's just a government scapegoat. Secondly, as I said, today wasn't my day, so I'll just point out a few things. Secondly, I will talk about right to work. Right to work, Judge. For 7 years, I've been able to go out and do something, work. It has helped me to, sometimes I know that I'm a depressed woman and I don't trust myself, but it has helped to see me as a human being who has been wearing the second-hand clothes from charity shop to go outside, campaign for direct provision, and do work with my fellow asylum seekers. Being able to connect in Irish community. It has not been an easy thing to do that. And what the government has to understand is, by not allowing asylum seekers to go out, to go out and work, it's not only killing their self-confidence, but it's also nailing their corpse under the 6 feet, because the results of this is people who have not been able to be allowed to work for a long time and sitting in direct provision. It is allowing people to live and understand that the moral and normal life of living is to live under social welfare benefit. Even tomorrow, if the government decides to let us to go and work, it's going to be very hard for people, because people, they've lived for 5 to 10 years, 9 years, living on a social welfare, and we don't know how the government is going to put this into practice. How are we going to work? Are they going to put restrictions over that? And also, Ireland has to understand that research has also suggested that refugees and asylum seekers, they've also contributed to the country where they've been accepted to seek asylum. So this is a lose-lose game. You are creating a community which is going to be mentally disturbed, and not only our kids are going to be disturbed, but even us, me as a mother, and as men and women living in direct provision, we are very disturbed people. And this is like a big issue that I think when the government is pressing the right to work, they have to also find ways of helping people who are still living in direct provision, how we can go out and act as normal living human beings. Thank you very much.
I'm getting signals from the wing, am I? We'll ask one more question. Is it? No? I think we're finished. I'll give you the floor. Sorry, there's one lady before, one last lady. Sorry. I'm sorry, I missed you. Yeah.
Thank you, good evening. Actually, I still live at the Eglinton, but she mentioned something about people living in the Eglinton, 3 people in a room, 4 people in a room, and people with whole children and their parents living together. But I want to ask, is there anything that they are trying to do about it, or is just being said, and we'll still leave 3 people in the room? Like me, like I have a son of 9 years, and I have a daughter who will still be 7, and myself, we're still in one room. So I'm trying to ask if there's anything going to do about it, because there are some people, 3 people from different countries, still living in one room, and we're still eating from the food they prepare for us. Is that how you like it or not? That is the food you have to eat. If it's healthy for your children or not, we don't have any source of income, so that's what we still eat. So I'm trying to ask if there's anything that they are going to do about that, pending the time we're still living in the hostel. At least if we know our case is not going to be answered soon, we should have a bit of happiness inside us and try to treat our children right. Because like 3 people living in one room is stressful enough to pick up fights among each other, because we all have different problems we're going through. We all handle our cases differently. I might be the quiet one, the other one might want to react because she's not in a good mood that very day. And me having 2 children with me, the other one might be using the bathroom, while the small one too want to use the bathroom at the same time. We don't have choice but to tell the other one, hold your body till the other one finish, then you go in. And even the adult staying in one room, maybe the other one will want to use the toilet, and the other one too want to use the toilet at the same time. We have to wait. Sometimes the other one will say, you are using the toilet because you are staying there for a long time because you know I want to use the toilet. But it's not that way. It's because we are not that happy in the kind of situation we have, so we reacted kind of funny. So I just want to ask if there is anything they could do about that, pending the time where at least that should make us happy a bit, knowing that we are working and we are coming home, pending the time they are going to answer us, and we'll know our fates.
Thank you. I just... With regard to the cooking, it's generally accepted in our report, that it was desirable that every asylum family should have the facilities to cook their own meal in them. Now, the government, in fairness to them, because of the diverse centres, the kind of the centres, some of them are schools, so they don't have kitchens available. Mosney is the best example, because Mosney was designed as holiday homes, and every apartment or house had a kitchen in it. So they have now, as you know, made special food available, and they have introduced a system of points. Instead of giving you the €19, they give you so many points where you can go and shop, and they have a variety of foods suitable to the Africans and to the Indians and to the Pakistanis, where you can buy food that you like and that you can bring back to your apartment. There are 700, I think, people in Mosney. So there's a biggish crowd, and it's a big centre, the biggest centre easily. But it was ideal in the sense that it was best fitted out to make living somewhat tolerable in those situations. Other places have to be converted. There's health and safety issues. They're trying to put in communal kitchens like they would have in the student accommodation places, you know, where 5 students might have access to a common kitchen, and you have it at 5:30 and I'll have it at 7 and whatever, you know, this kind of thing. But it's not easy, and it requires money. And they're not obviously doing it fast enough in some cases for people. So we made the recommendations. We can't implement it, but you can make your own complaints and pressure, put your own pressure to achieve it. But as Blessing has said here, you know, it's horrific to think that a family of 3 cannot cook a meal and sit down in the evening to a meal together. And it deprives of so much of the social benefits that we take for granted in a family context. Not to be able to shop, not to be able to cook, and not to be able to converse and break bread together. Thank you.
That's all I can say.
Okay, thank you. Let me jump in here and start wrapping things up for the evening. Cormac Deane is my name. I'm speaking on behalf of the Field Day Board. This is now the end of the first of 2 events. The second will take under the heading "The Right to Have Rights." The second, I don't know if there's many people who'll be in Galway this Saturday and be in Derry on Friday next week, but that's the second event. On very closely related themes, but of course you're in a different jurisdiction in Derry, so but it would be great to see some of you there. We are making recordings of these events, this one and the one in Derry, so if you wait a few weeks and you want to catch up, find us at the Field Day website, fieldday.ie, and you can see what you missed in the other venue. So, just cúpla focal dearnacha. Thank you all for being here. Táid anmhuioch de na daoine seo Alianas. Well, dús Ulscoil na Héireann in GIAF and on Tuchtran Brown. Thank you very much. The funds for this come from Atlantic Philanthropies via our solid friend Billy Hall. Without that, this simply doesn't happen. So, absolutely, thank you. We are also participating in the Galway International Arts Festival. Paul Fahy, who was the first person to stand up and speak here today, is if you need to fill a room in Galway, go to Paul Fahy apparently. Míle buíochas, thank you very much. We're very happy to have cooperated with you. The person who did all the work, I should say, from our side, from the Field Day side, and I think he should stand up here and take a wee bow, is Fergus Denman. He did everything. He thought it was just a little project, and he's only halfway through it. The audiovisual team that we have here from Relapse Pictures and Sean Murray are very, very generously giving us their time. And then there are the speakers and musicians who we have been lucky enough to listen to here tonight. So Jessica Traynor, Paddy Glacken playing Neil's music, Christiana Obaro, who I had the pleasure of driving from Dublin to here today with, and her friend. Blessings, thank you, Blessings Moyo, and Bryan McMahon. And there's one other name, Elizabeth, who I should have included with Paul Fahy. Excuse me, I left that out as I went through them. So thank you all very much. We really only just started opening up so many things that people are desperately wanting to talk to each other and in front of other people who are ignorant of their situations. That is patent here, and you can kind of feel the rawness of how things are for many people in this room. So maybe some of you will congregate outside and decide, well, let's go to a pub or let's do whatever and keep talking about it or just linger. I think it's a nice warm night outside. So, Shin Shin and Grimila Mahakif.
Sorry, I just want to say something. For those who live in Galway, I think you've heard, some of you might have heard of One World Tapestry. One World Tapestry, it's a multicultural restaurant which cooks food from all over the world. And so One World Tapestry is something that I set up after living in direct provision for so long and denied to cook. So I decided I'm going to go out, set up something whereby I can bring out ladies from the hostel to come and cook the meals and then invite everyone just to come get together, get to know each other through food. So this Friday, for those who live in Galway, we are having Interwoven Fashion Show. We're going to be showing the beauty of colors, which is the beauty of diversity, of the beauty of different colors of people together through fashion. So it will be through fashion. So if you want to come and see beautiful colors, and you're welcome. It's free. It's at 36 Abbeygate Street. It's electric, so you can just come in and join us and have fun. There will be music and dancing after. So you're all welcome.